you can spend your whole life trying to figure out how to approach women, how to talk to girls, and what's effective and what's not effective, and all those other things. And you can do all those things by yourself, or you can do it under the training of somebody who's not only done it for the past, I don't know how many years, many, many years, but somebody who's been living and breathing it. And the thing is, that's really important, that if you don't already know, it's hard to understand, is that you don't get feedback from girls in the way you expect. And this is one of the sticking points I had as Tony's student. But by that I mean, when you're talking to a girl, you don't know one way or the other necessarily, unless you're practiced, how she actually feels. And the problem is, girls are very, very good at not letting on what they're feeling inside, especially if they don't want to share it exactly with you. And the thing that you get with working with a teacher who's been living and breathing this their entire lives is that they know what to look for. They know all of the subtle things that they can teach you, and these things you're not going to have an appreciation for it unless you're actually working with somebody who does. You have to have that point of reference. And if you don't, you're probably going to be stumbling around for many, many years trying to figure it out. That's what happened to me before I decided to hire Tony. That's what a whole bunch of guys have gone through for many, many years, and some of them never figure it out. So you have to ask yourself, is this something that's important enough to me that I want to actually measurably get a deeper understanding of, and also measurably get better, and we're not just talking about confidence, but we're talking about competence in, or is this something where I want to just stumble around in the dark and maybe get lucky? Well, you don't have to rely on just getting lucky, and you shouldn't have to rely on just getting lucky. If this is something that's important to you, and it was important to me, then you need to learn from a teacher who knows their stuff, and Tony knows his stuff. Figuring out how to not only operate more successfully in a social space, but with women as well, is not the kind of space that lends itself easily to figuring out by yourself. And that's because most of us are burdened by whatever our histories are. Some people are really great at this sort of thing naturally, and that's because that's the kind of natural baggage that they've carried with themselves all these years. But that's not how all of us grew up, and so we don't have the same equipment that everyone does. But the problem is, everybody looks at it like something that is intractable because that's how it feels. In other words, oh, I'm not good with women, I don't know how to talk to them, so I'll never be that way, right? Well, that's not how it is at all. But the thing is that to someone who doesn't have another frame of reference, it's difficult to see how that could not be the case. And so one of the most important things, if you want to look, this applies to a lot of different things all at the same time. If you want to be able to simply operate more comfortably in social situations, if you want to operate more successfully in social situations, and it even comes down to directly being more successful with women. All of these things, you need to have a frame of reference, and you need to have signposts from somebody who's been doing it, because you're not going to be able to easily figure out what to do otherwise, because it's just the kind of dynamic, it's just the kind of system that doesn't lend itself to figuring itself out, because the girls aren't going to tell you at face value what you need to do. So you can't rely on direct feedback in this type of system. And in the absence of feedback, you can have one of two choices. You can stumble around in the dark until you figure it out, which is really hard, and it takes many years. And some people never figure it out. Some people wait until they're 50 before they figure out some of this. And you should ask yourself, is this something that I want to stumble around about in my life before I figured it out? Or is this something that I want to figure out maybe before I'm 50 or 40 or however old you are? You have a limited amount of time here. And what I've learned over the past few years, since having been Tony's student, is something that it's hard to put into words because it's an experiential kind of thing. It's a kind of sensitivity that I never even thought existed. There's so much subtlety that happens in social communication, and you've probably heard the conceit, the old stereotypical thing where it's like, oh, so much percent of your conversational dynamic is nonverbal, right? They say something like, 70% of what happens in conversation between people is nonverbal. And it's one thing to kind of say, okay, well, maybe I believe it on an intellectual level. But if you work with Tony, one thing that you'll start to gain an appreciation for, much more strongly than you ever have, is what that means on an emotional level. What does that mean to feel what somebody is thinking? I know it sounds crazy, but that's what you'll start to be able to gain. You'll start to gain an ability and a sensitivity toward what people are communicating to you on the nonverbal level, on the covert level. And this is actually one of the most beautiful aspects of human communication in the first place, that unless you put in the work and unless you have a frame of reference like somebody like Tony's, it's going to be really hard to pick up that stuff. And it's just been such a joy just figuring that stuff out after a while. And it used to be such a painful thing for me. And you have to get over that hump that it's painful, because none of this actually starts until you get to that point. And it can be done. It just sometimes doesn't feel that way until you actually do it. So what you should do is you should go hire Tony for a month, and you should work with him, and you will gain a whole other appreciation for what it means to just have a conversation with somebody. Because there's so many more things that are happening in so many different levels, and they're all meaningful. One of the things that was absolutely helpful when I was learning from Tony is that he can tell where you are in what your abilities are in your social ability to interact with people. And so he knows what you need to practice, and he knows what you need a little bit less to practice. And one of the things that was most productive when I was working with him was that he's going to give you challenges. He's going to give you direction. He's going to give you a very precise things to focus on when you're out in the field, when you're socializing with people. And he's going to do this in a directed way to make the most of the time that you're going to spend with him. And this is really important because most of social interactions are us just stumbling around. And we don't really have, it is difficult to have a singular focus when you don't know in what direction precisely to focus yourself. So that is what Tony brings to the table here, is that he knows the goal, and he can see where you are in between yourself and wherever the goal is. And he knows what challenges, what things to challenge you with, and how to direct your actions in order to reach that goal better. And sometimes this will work on you in ways that are more than just what's on the face of it. So if you need, for example, practicing a certain type of thing because you need to learn the lesson of what's going to happen if I do this or that thing, then that's what Tony is going to have you do. The most important thing is that all this stuff that means the biggest deal in the world, all this stuff about talking to women, it seems like it's this huge thing, right? And Tony's really good at showing you that it's not just, well, it is just all in your head, right? As far as what's hard or what's not hard, social interaction is a type of dynamic where sometimes things can seem the furthest from reality and the furthest from possibility, and whereas a moment later, it's like that same thing can feel like it's just exactly within your grasp. And that's the kind of thing that Tony will break down for you, and he will help you understand and navigate that type of space.